After a couple years of working with Hike-ALOT and almost 10 years of working with Texas Survival School and almost that many volunteering with a search and rescue group, today I've got 12 survival skills that you need if you're a hiker or backpacker. Do you have them all? Let's find out. Now, first and foremost, if you have followed my channel for very long, you've probably heard me harp on this one repeatedly. Learn real land navigation. I don't mean can I follow the map application inside my cell phone. Those are wonderful. Use technology when you can use them, but you also need to be able to use a map and compass. Those things, the batteries are not going to die in them. No one thinks they're lost until the sun starts going down and the batteries have died. That's when panic and fear sets in. Learn to use a map and compass. Have the ability and the supplies to actually set up a quick, hasty shelter in the event that you do have to spend the night outside when it's unplanned. One thing that goes a long way with helping with that is being comfortable tying a handful of knots. If you're curious about learning some of those, I've got a playlist that's attached to my profile here on this channel. It's got a ton of knots in there. If you learn a half dozen of them, you probably know 5 more than most people. But have a quick way to throw up shelter, whether it's a tarp or a poncho or whatever, just something to get you out of the elements in the event you've got to spend the night out there, especially if it's rainy. Speaking of getting caught in the rain, our third one is being able to look at the clouds and make some kind of educated interpretation on what the weather's going to bring, because our morning forecast before we leave out isn't necessarily always the most accurate thing, and things can change. See it all the time during the summer, biting people. It's just as big of a problem during the winter, but just don't see as much of it. Hydration, hydration, hydration. We are always walking around, most of us at least, in some kind of state of dehydration. We need the ability and the know-how to go through and make water safe while we're out on the trail. We can't always be dependent on carrying absolutely everything that we need. Have that as your backup plan. Coming hot on the heels of water filtration, you also can be really, really very comfortable lighting a fire. And I don't mean when the conditions are just perfect outside. We walk up there and we flick our Bic and we've got our fire going. Learn to light a fire when the conditions are bad. When I'm exhausted and I'm really thirsty and I need some water and maybe I'm having to boil it to make it safe, or I'm freezing cold and I can't feel my fingers, or it's been pouring down rain on me the entire time. You need to be able to light fires in those inclement conditions and have the supplies to do it. And both the hydration and the Firecraft come into play with our next one, and that's learn to manage and manipulate the body temp. Being able to regulate that and cool off when it's too hot outside or warm up when it's too cold outside goes a long way. There's only a handful of different ways that we typically lose body heat. We have evaporation, respiration, radiation, conduction, and convection. Like, those are the 5 biggies. If you learn to manipulate those, it goes a long way toward keeping you at that core temperature that you need to be, whether it's warming myself up when it's too cold outside or cooling myself back down when it's too warm. This next one is going to be far more applicable in some areas than in others. Be aware of swift water. There's several different swift water awareness courses that are out there that are well worth taking. When I went through mine, it was definitely things in there that I learned about reading and picking the correct, most safe area to cross a river, as far as like reading the eddies and stuff around rocks and low-hanging items. It's a very educational thing. Those classes are typically free. I'll try to remember to throw a link down in the description below. If you're in an area where you're often hiking and crossing water, take a swift water aware class. Speaking of awareness, the next one is being animal aware. You need to know the threats that are going to be in your immediate area, things that you're going to be conscious of, whether it's bears or it's snakes. Here in the U.S., we're pretty much all worrying about snakes at some point, unless we're living in Alaska or Hawaii. Here in the U.S., we're pretty much always, with a handful of exceptions, we're always having to be conscious of snakes, whether it's big cats or it's the elusive chupacabra out there. I'm just kidding about the chupacabra. But to be aware of that, and much like the Swiftwater Awareness class, there are bear aware classes that you can go out there and take, and I'll try to throw a link for one of those down there as well. Just kind of let you know habitats, and if you encounter them, kind of goes in depth on that. Well worth taking it if you're not familiar with them and you're venturing into bear country. Having said that, though, animal encounters typically aren't a big, huge threat. Read off some stats for you guys. These are all specific to here in the United States. So we average about 5 snake fatalities annually. We average about 4 to 5 on the high end for a busy year, about 10 fatalities from a spider bite. Big cat deaths super low. Black bear super low. It's usually like 1 to 2 a year. Grizzly bear goes up a little bit more, but it's usually only the kind of that 2 to 3 mark on a normal year. These are all stats that are at least reported, at least. Hogs super low, and which I worry about those guys because they're just so mean and they're all over here in Texas. But when you add all of those up, you're still, less than probably 24 people. We have about 24 people a year get killed by a popped champagne cork at a wedding. And actually, the last year when I looked, there was exactly 24 people that got killed by that. This next one's actually a twofer. First off, learn some basic signaling techniques, and these are going to vary based on how search and rescue in that area is going to work. Is it going to be predominantly, people flying over looking for me, or is it boots on the ground? If it's people flying over, then obviously I need my signaling to be available from above and more easily viewed. Whereas if it's boots on the ground, I need something that's more perpendicular to the ground, is sort of parallel, so it's more visible from the ground. And then going along with that, in the event that I am stuck out there and I need to know the techniques and have the ability to self-rescue if it's called for. Because when it's all said and done, like our entire goal for this, if we're stuck out in the woods, is to get home. Sometimes the best option isn't necessarily to sit and wait on someone to come get me. That's always great as a last resort. But if I know some self-recovery techniques and can work myself back out of that in a methodical, logical fashion, then I'm that much better off in the whole scheme of things. The next one should be relatively common sense, but sometimes not always necessarily the case. Be physically fit enough for what I'm tackling. Now, I'm not saying that you have to be a decathlete to go out and enjoy a good hike. We need to do all of that in moderation, but just be conscious and be aware enough of yourself to recognize that, hey, this might be too much for me. So just a little self-awareness, quite honestly, is a survival skill. And on that same front, learn real first aid. Go take a wilderness first aid class or something. There are a ton of them out there. I teach one. I've actually got one coming up next weekend that I'm teaching. Go out, find a location that's offering that in your area and pick one of those up. It's usually a 2-day deal. There are some things that you just absolutely cannot handle out in the wild, but there's a lot of stuff that you can definitely mitigate it, especially if you're out there by yourself. Whether it's me having to take care of myself or a family member or just someone I'm encountering on the trail, it'll give you a lot more confidence going into the situation and just make you that much more prepared to be out there in the event that something happens. This next one's probably the most important one that's out there. Without it, all the rest of the stuff is probably not going to save you. You need the mental toughness to actually go through the situation. I like to chalk it up as a healthy dose of stubborn. My wife will probably tell you it's entirely too much stubborn, but we'll leave her out of this. But have the mental fortitude to just trudge through. Just focus, do the next right thing. We're just going to make it through it. Take that approach. Okay, guys, hopefully you found that beneficial. It's been a subject that's been on my list for a little while to tackle and finally got off of my rear enough to do it. Like I said, just go into the woods, do it safely, be mindful, prepare for the unexpected. You're going to be much better off for it. If you don't have some of these skills, look for a way to find them. Some of these things I've already tackled in other videos, or at least glossed through, or at least cruised through. I'll try to throw links to all of that stuff. Actually, I'll toss it into a playlist and throw that in the description down below as well. So maybe if you want to go in and at least kind of tackle the content that I've covered for it, it'll be out there at a nice convenient spot for you. And as always, if you're checking this video out from the trail, just remember, left foot, right foot, repeat. We'll see you out there again soon.